Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2015 to 2018 series, The Mighty Thor. You know, the great part about covering a series of, series, is that I don't really have to do much of an introduction. I can just say, go watch my previous two videos if you'd like to know what's going on, and that will pretty much cover it. But just in case you're rude and you don't want to do that, or if you're awesome and you watched those videos right when they came out, so it's been a week or two for you, here's a quick refresher of the important deets. Thor, Norse god of thunder, was turned into the human Dr. Donald Blake by his father Odin, king of the gods, in order to learn humility. But after a time he was allowed to find his hammer, Mjolnir, which would then allow him to transform back into Thor. Blake would fall in love with his nurse Jane Foster, who would remain more or less a relevant character to his story throughout the years. Eventually, writer Jason Aaron would take over writing duties on Thor, and he would bring back the villain Malekith the Accursed, who would start a war against his own dark elf race until they appointed him king. From there he would ally with the frost giants of Jotunheim and Dario Agger, CEO of Roxxon Energy Corporation from Midgard, aka Earth, who also happens to be a were-minotaur because why not? With their combined goal being to resurrect the king of the frost giants, Lao Fei. And while this axis of fantasy evil was forming, our regularly featured Thor was being reclassified as unworthy and lost the ability to lift Mjolnir. The Hammer then chose the now Dr. Jane Foster, Thor's old love interest, to be the new wielder, granting her instead the power of Thor. And that pretty much brings us up to this series, with Jane Foster taking the role of Thor, the original Thor considering himself to be unworthy and going by the name Odinson, and Malekith gathering his forces of evil and preparing to strike. So let's strike the match to light this tinderbox and take this away. The comic opens on Jane Foster getting some chemotherapy, cause this is the really exciting stuff right here. Yes, writer Jason Aaron introduced to us the fact that Thor's longtime love interest of Jane Foster was dying from breast cancer back when he first started writing the characters in Thor God of Thunder. Most of that story fell by the wayside after that first introduction though, as Jane's role in the series was downplayed to further help the mystery around who the new Thor was for the previous Thor series. But now that we're in this series and already know that the new Thor is Jane, we can learn a little bit more about what is actually happening to her. And it seems that whenever she picks up Mjolnir and is transformed into Thor, her body is purified of foreign chemicals and poisons. The problem with that is that the hammer essentially sees the cancer as part of her, but the chemotherapy intended to cure that cancer as foreign. So instead of it working like it's supposed to, it's repeatedly ejected from her body entirely and not allowed to do its good work. Meaning Jane is largely suffering the worst parts of chemo without getting any of the benefits. And also meaning that the cancer is just getting worse and worse and will soon be killing her. But before that happens, Jane plans to have a great time smashing things with hammers. And you know what? I also hope that's how I go out. Smashing things with hammers. But the plot really kicks off much the way it did in the previous series, with a Roxxon research station under attack. But there was an underwater station attacked by frost giants, and here it's a space station under attack by elves in space! Okay, it's not actually under attack by elves, just instead being pelted with their dead bodies. Ditched in space above Midgard somehow from their home realm of Alfheim, their corpses gruesomely marked with the ominous message, "So begins the War of the Realms." Which is not quite right though. I mean, these elves come from the attack Malekith the Accursed made on Alfheim, but that actually happened in the last series. And if you want to get technical, Malekith's realm war really began when he attacked his own realm of Svartalfheim, which happened 2 series ago in Thor God of Thunder. Or, arguably, the War of the Realms doesn't start until the actual crossover event of the same name that doesn't start until 4 years after this. so kind of odd that we're claiming it starts here specifically, but okay, I guess? This will be the point that Thor finally gets involved. The Congress of Realms, the ruling body consisting of representatives from every realm, is unable or unwilling to act, especially with Scumtongue, one of Malekith's most trusted, serving as the Svartalfheim representative, helping muck up matters by denying the attack on Alfheim is even happening. Jane, as a member of the Congress, quickly sees she won't be able to help through the proper channels, so she elects to go the vigilante route as Thor. When she arrives on Alfheim, she can see that the war truly has gone full scale, with Dark Elf warriors fighting alongside frost giants and humans with tanks supplied by Roxxon. She attempts to intervene to hold the line for Alfheim's last unconquered capital city, but then Tom Hiddleston shows up. Okay, I do mean Loki, but you can't tell me that his appearance hasn't been clearly and deliberately changed to mimic a certain actor. Like, come on. Be less obvious. Loki has joined Malekith's Dark Congress of Worlds, having been hired specifically to slay Thor, as no one has more experience in trying to kill the God of Thunder than Loki does. And Loki makes a comment here about how it's good to be bad once again, which is a reference to how, for the past few years leading up to this, Loki has been trying to essentially rebrand as a hero, to supposedly fight on the side of good. But now he's back to being a villain, I guess, and spending time with his dear resurrected daddy, Laufey, king of the Frost Giants. Not that Laufey likes him at all, seeing Loki as a failure and not a real Frost Giant, and even tries to kill him. But Laufey is just kind of an asshole in general. When he first meets Lady Thor and Loki suggests she's just as capable as the regular Thor, Laufey just laughs at the concept of a woman having that kind of strength. And Thor says she makes it a point to remember every second of that laughter, which seems like foreshadowing. It seems a lot like foreshadowing, but it's not. They'll never meet again. Also, Laufey, not sure you should be laughing, seeing as in actual Norse mythology, you were Loki's mom, not dad, so, you know, you should be pretty familiar with the whole gender swap thing already. Anyway, it doesn't help Loki any that he seems conflicted about his role in these events, as various other versions of him manifest to heckle him and Thor during their confrontation. Mostly he was just there to delay things though, as Laufey, Malekith, and Agger send an entire squadron of ridiculously cute bat riders. Look at their ears and how fluffy they are, I want one! Where was I? Oh right. As they send the Bat Riders in carrying bombs to blow up both Thor and Loki, as well as the Elf Citadel. Thor manages to stop the bombs and save everyone, but this gets the Elf Queen to demand an audience with Malekith, believing herself safe to meet with him alone since her magical advisor should be able to prevent any spells Malekith might cast from harming her. Only those advisors are already dead, killed by old Thor villain, the Enchantress, who then enchants the Elf Queen into marrying Malekith, delivering Alfheim under his control without any further fighting. And Thor lets this happen because the moment the queen is first ensorcelled, Malekith mentions to Thor that Lady Freya is on trial, and Thor immediately takes Loki and rushes back to Asgard to provide backup for the Allmother. This only leads to a big battle between Thor and Odin, and while the two fight, Freya leads a coup in Asgard using all those loyal to her over Odin, including Loki, who she had apparently personally sent to join Malekith's council in the hopes of using him as a spy. But Loki, the old backstabber, stabs Lady Freya in the back with a poisoned knife and runs back to Malekith. Of course, he'll claim later that he was trying to help her, you know, pulling a Loki. He'll say that her being on the throne of Asgard scared Malekith because she would undoubtedly lead the gods into the war before the Dark Elf King was ready for them. Odin and Cole are too stubborn and don't care what happens to the other realms because, remember, hashtag Odin is the worst. And so if they're on the throne, Malekith doesn't have to worry. Knowing Malekith would try everything in his power to kill Freya while she was on the throne, and knowing Freya would never willingly give up the throne, Loki simply poisons her to knock her out and take that choice away from her. As soon as this happened, Odin ends the battle with Thor and takes Freya, locking both her and himself away from the rest of Asgard while he attempts to provide her with infusions of his godly blood in hopes of saving her. With a temporary break in the war before Malekith starts gunning for the next realm, we take a step back to spend some time on Midgard and with Dario Agger, part-time Minotaur and full-time Roxxon CEO. He asks Loki for help creating some super soldiers, and after Loki tells us a long story about young Thor, helps Agger kill a dragon so that his men can drink the dragon's blood and become Hulk-like super warriors. And he'll immediately have need of those new warriors. As we'll see, a group of the ultra-wealthy on Earth, consisting of some of the worst villains of the Marvel Universe, like Tiberius Stone, a name that will have a lot of meaning for my fellow Spidey 2099 fans out there, what up, yo? As well as Hellfire member Sebastian Shaw, the sons of Silver Samurai and Ironmonger, and the Kingpin, have all gathered together as they apparently sometimes do to make decisions that will affect the entire world. In this time, it's specifically because they're angry that Dario Agger has gained exclusive rights to oil and minerals from the other 9 realms, and they demand that he share, which he of course has no intention of doing. But all of this was apparently really just a means for Silver Samurai Shinjin Harada to join with the Exterminatrix, who we last saw in my America video, to stage a hostile takeover of his company. So they hack his accounts and kidnap him to gain access to his wealth and secrets. But apparently Agger put a failsafe in place that if his life is ever endangered, his floating island would smash into Manhattan at high speeds, causing an extinction level event. I'm assuming you've seen Age of Ultron, so you should get the idea. Thankfully though, we're not just in store for 2 hours of robot punching. Instead, we pretty quickly end up at a big showdown on Roxxon Island as Thor and Roz Solomon attempt to stop Exterminatrix and Harada, while Agger tries to stop everybody, and some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, believing they've figured out for certain that Jane Foster must be Thor, try to stop Thor and arrest her for, I don't really know, illegally being an unregistered superhero? Is this still about Civil War stuff? I can't really keep track of how long that fallout actually lasted. But Exterminatrix shoots Thor with a special bullet, one filled with the blood of her father, the mythological Midas, whose touch literally did turn things to gold, and I guess so does his blood, which is about all Exterminatrix has left of him as he died during Original Sin. As the bullet threatens to turn Thor to gold, the Rainbow Bridge suddenly opens and out walks Jane Foster? What? Jane, who is clearly not actually Jane, gets the real Jane to talk her through how to remove the bullet from her hand so she doesn't die. And the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are left with nothing but confusion. As they leave, they make a joke about Daredevil being a lawyer from Hell's Kitchen, so I guess by this point we're back to him having a secret identity. I can't keep track of that either. Once the bullet has been removed, Thor takes Roxxon Island and simply throws it into the sun, while Agger, Harada, and Exterminatrix all get thrown in jail for undoubtedly an extremely short amount of time because rich people, am I right? Once they're alone, it's revealed to Roz and Thor that the fake Jane all along was actually Mjolnir? What the shit? When real Jane takes the hammer in hand once again, she's suddenly teleported by it across the universe to Omnipotent City in the Great Library of the Gods, which we haven't seen since the first arc of Aaron's first Thor series. Seriously, I hope you guys watch those videos because I'm not explaining everything again. We're here now because it's time to learn what the deal is with Mjolnir and why it suddenly seems to have such a mind of its own. And to learn that, we go back to its creation. The hammer started as just a chunk of the mythical metal Uru given as a gift to Odin by the dwarves of Nidavellir, or however you say that. At first, Odin thought nothing of the gift, but then a supermassive storm called the God Tempest, or the Mother of Thunder, came to Asgard. And Odin did battle with the storm to protect his realm. In the end, Odin was able to use the chunk of Uru to capture the storm. He then had the dwarves forge it, which required the dwarves to harness the heat of a star, seeing as Uru was otherwise indestructible, and they forged it into a hammer. This seems to indicate that the hammer is itself alive, powered by the god or goddess, I guess, of storms that maintains some degree of conscience control over the hammer and, to an extent, its wielder. Returned from her trip to the library, Thor gets together with a new League of Realms, with Lady Waziria replaced by a mystic named Ro Bloodrot from the realm called Vanaheim, and poor dead Augie replaced by a mountain giant named Titania. They've also added in Thor's sister Angela, Lady Sif from Asgard, and Roz Solomon. Their goal is to rescue the Elf Queen and possibly even free Alfheim, but Malekith was ready and waiting for them with a new version of Curse. Curse, originally a guy named Algrim, has been an occasional enemy and an ally of both Thor and Malekith. Or really, his enchanted armor has? But for this new version, Malekith went to Niflheim, to the shores of Hell, to pull Waziria out of her self-imposed eternal punishment and turn her into his new servant. Which is fitting because literally the last words Waziria said to Malekith in Thor God of Thunder were, "I'll see you in Hell." Guess she was right. With Curse by his side, Malekith proves to be too powerful for the League, but he lets them have the Queen in their realm anyway, since his Dark Elves have already depleted all of the land's resources, and he's turned their capital into a blazing inferno thanks to gallons of whale's oil that he just left lying around. That's what happens when you leave oil just lying around. You should take better care of that stuff. Be cool about fire safety, kids. After Malekith escapes on the Black Bifrost that he's apparently managed to create, Asgard comes under attack by members of the Shi'ar, including Gladiator with his super cool mohawk, and Warstar. He's full of tinier men. All they really want though is to kidnap Thor so she can be challenged to a battle of the gods by the gods of the Shi'ar, and our old pal Shadrach even shows up to officiate, continuing to claim that he's the god of a bunch of stuff that we know he's not the god of. The plot here mostly is just a lot of gods wiping out civilizations by horrible means for no reason whatsoever because gods are callous assholes that act like spoiled rich kids. At least when Aaron writes them. I mean, I guess I get it. If gods did exist and they allowed the amount of suffering to go on that they do, then that does seem pretty awful. But also, if we accept the premise that there's really that many gods in the universe, then wouldn't it follow that at least a few of them were good? Is Thor really the only outlier? And that much of an outlier? It just feels like such a weird attack on the entire concept of religion in a story that is literally about the adventures of existing gods. It's just such a cognitive dissonance. I don't get the point of it. The main things to get out of this part of the comic are that Cole, who has been running Asgardia while Odin is locked away with Freya, forces Jane out of the Congress of Realms, somewhat humorously wanting to replace her with Red Skull's daughter Sin, but instead Jane elects her replacement to be Roz Solomon, which seems like a random pick to me, but okay. And that the Shi'ar gods' temper tantrums apparently resulted in the resurrection of Mangog, who will get to us eventually, honest. But before we get to that, we check in on the dwarf home of Nidavellir, where the elves of Alfheim have come seeking refuge. Volstagg, originally of the Warriors 3 but currently part of the Congress of Realms, has come to check in on the dwarves and the refugees, and ends up somewhat unwittingly sharing his massive lunch with some of the elf children. But then the realm suddenly comes under attack by the fire goblins of Muspelheim, and their fire, which can burn through essentially everything but their own blood, quickly burns through the entire camp, wiping out the elves. Volstagg escapes with the elf children, but runs across a fire goblin as it sets off a bomb of Muspelheim fire. This blows up the goblin, splattering its blood all over Volstagg, saving his life, but it also burns away all the children. That is fucked up. Traumatized by this event, Volstagg finds himself being called by a different hammer. This hammer is the Hammer of Thor from the Ultimate Universe, but that universe was wiped out during the 2015 Secret Wars series, and only this hammer survived. Well, and Miles Morales and a bunch of his supporting cast and some other people, and look, it's complicated. But basically, the Ultimate Universe is gone, this hammer is mostly all that remains, and that means it's basically charged with the anger and rage of that entire universe. So when Volstagg in his trauma lifts the hammer, it converts him into the War Thor. He returns to Nidavellir and uses his new powers to put out the fires and kill the fire goblins, then takes the fight straight to Muspelheim and their queen, Cinder. But our regular Thor shows up to stop him, and not realizing yet who he is, the two Thors start a fight that burns across all the realms. Finally, Odin's son shows up to try and stop the fight, made aware by Ross Solomon that the War Thor is his old friend Volstagg. But that's not what finally brings an end to the fight. Instead, now aware of who the War Thor actually is, Thor returns to being just Jane and appeals to the unique friendship she had forged with Volstagg to get him to finally drop the hammer and let it all go. Which is what seems to finally work, and finally allows Volstagg the chance to grieve. But that War of the Realms has by no means been stopped or even slowed, as we see Roxxon attacking Vanaheim, the Fire Goblins attacking Niflheim, and Malekith showing up in heaven to apparently make a deal with the Queen of the Angels. And then shortly after that, all three groups are also shown attacking the Norns, basically the Nordic Fates, at the base of the world tree Yggdrasil, severing the Norns' control over the Fates so that Malekith can write his own fate. But we won't be seeing what comes of that in this series, because despite having given up the Warhammer, the name now given to the Ultimate Thor's Mjolnir, Volstagg suddenly gives into the pull of the hammer once again and picks it right back up. Thor's goat, Tooth Gnasher, I guess? Or maybe Tooth Grinder? Twins, you know? Anyway, it tries to stop him, and their fight leads them to Midgard. Told ya he'd be back. Who immediately kills Thor's poor goat. Aw, but Tooth Gnasher. Or was it Tooth Grinder? Twins, you know? War Thor Volstagg tries to stop Midgard because while the creature is powered by the rage of an entire race of people wiped out by Odin, hashtag Odin is the worst for serious, Volstagg's hammer carries the rage of an entire wiped out universe. But that's still somehow less powerful, and Midgard even manages to smash Volstagg's arm, breaking the hammer into chunks and leaving him to drift in space. Our regular Thor isn't handling the situation because, nearing death, Jane Foster is down on Earth going through some bucket list items, like challenging Hercules to an arm wrestling match in a bar, where we can get some creator cameos, like Jason Aaron and Russell Dauterman and some of the editorial staff, including Will Moss, who's the bartender and even gets the bar named after him for some reason. Why not, I guess. When she learns about what Midgard did to Volstagg, she confronts Odin as Jane Foster, demanding he get Asgard involved in the War of the Realms before it's too late. Odin, as I said, has been locked away with Freya since she was stabbed, but now they both emerge, with Freya mostly recovered from Loki's poison. But before much comes of this confrontation, Jane simply collapses. It seems her cancer is too far advanced. Doctor Strange, who at this point in the continuity is just a regular doctor once again, and all of her friends convince her that she has to give up being Thor so that the chemo can finally have a chance to work. And she agrees. For about 5 minutes. But once she realizes Midgard has truly arrived in Asgard, she decides she has to do her part, no matter what happens to her. It's true what they say about doctors always making the worst patients. Because she's a doctor herself. I'm not sure if I've actually mentioned that. So Jane takes Mjolnir again and flies up to Asgardia and faces off against Midgard, who has already blinded Heimdall, shattered the Bifrost, and destroyed the Destroyer. Which is all pretty insane on its own. But when Thor shows up, the battle is pretty short. She simply throws Midgard into the sun. Yeah, you're right, Odin. Why didn't you ever think of that? It's probably because you're the worst. But Midgard manages to recover before he reaches the sun and returns to cause more havoc. So this time, Jane ties him to Mjolnir and throws both him and the hammer into the sun, which does finally kill Midgard, but also kills Mjolnir. Which, wow, that's pretty crazy, honestly. Kinda interesting that this whole Jane Foster Thor run literally started with her saying there must always be a Thor, but then it ends with her literally removing the possibility for anyone to be Thor ever again. And without the power of Thor to keep her alive, Jane collapses and dies. She wakes up at the gates of Valhalla, being greeted by Odin himself, who has finally accepted what everybody else has already known, that she really is worthy, and so he allows her to join the honored dead, but Odin's son isn't having it. It seems the God Storm wasn't destroyed with Mjolnir, but instead released, and Odin's son calls on its power to try and defibrillate and resuscitate Jane. And it seems to be working, as Jane's spirit is feeling the effects of the lightning, but even Odin's son can't handle the power of the storm alone. But thankfully, on this one occasion, Odin, realizing from Valhalla what must be happening to Jane, joins his son on the ruins of Asgardia and decides to help him. Okay, Odin, maybe I take back the thing about you being the worst, but you are on eggshells, my friend, eggshells. Jane is revived by their efforts, and there is much rejoicing. And there's a brief epilogue that sees Jane returning to her chemotherapy for good this time, and telling Odin's son that it's time for him to return to being Thor, even if it means he does it without his hammer. We also do see a bit more of Malekith in his preparations for the full-scale War of the Realms, which does begin shortly after this, but for us, it's only time for the breakdown. To be honest, I think this is my least favorite of the 3 Thor series, which is a bit surprising to say, honestly. Though I mostly skipped over how the last 2 story arcs get very emotional, particularly in what happens to Volstagg, and doing some flashbacks to other parts of Jane Foster's life that really shows us the tragedies she's had to face that have made her question her belief in God or gods, and how she's had to reconcile that with having become one now. It's surprisingly powerful stuff, but it's probably mostly surprisingly powerful because everything before that in this series was honestly pretty meh. A lot of the series seriously feels like it's just killing time to further delay the coming War of the Realms crossover, and it gets to feeling pretty disjointed and clunky, jumping from one storyline to the next without it having much flow or reason for getting there. And while I put up with Jason Aaron's outright antagonistic atheism just fine for the first 2 series, by this point it was really starting to get on my nerves. At least with Gore, it was somewhat cloaked in being the reasoning of the villain, but by the time we get to the incredibly pointless Shi'ar story, it was like he was just trying to hammer home the idea that all gods suck and that you should definitely think so too. It just feels really condescending and again contradictory to the fact that this story is literally about good gods. Oh well. I do still enjoy Douterman's art overall, but it's not like it's so good that it's worth reading the series for on its own. It's more like a nice treat for sitting through the whole thing. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of medium. The high points are really good, and you should probably read this if you're reading through Lady Thor's series, but overall it's just not on the same level as Aaron's other 2 Thor series. The collected editions get 2 Odins, 2 Unworthy Thors, and 1 Mighty Thor. And yes, that's right, Odin is the worst of those, when moving from bad to good. But truth be told, none of these collections are really that bad. So that breaks down like this. Volume 4 is only 4 issues, but it does include a special where Jane Thor meets young Thor, and it has a bonus cover gallery and a bunch of bonus art and sketches to make up for it. Volume 1 is 5 issues with just a bonus cover gallery. Volumes 2 and 3 are both 7 issues, with Volume 3 having just a few pages of bonus art, and Volume 2 having about the same amount of pages of bonus art and a bonus cover gallery. Volume 5 is 8 entire issues though, including the giant-sized issue 700 and the extra-sized epilogue issue, and includes a farewell from Aaron and Douterman, a cool height comparison chart drawn by Douterman, and a large cover gallery at the end. And we're done! Thanks everybody for watching, and that finally concludes my run on Jason Aaron's run on Thor. 3 different videos was probably more than strictly necessary to celebrate the new Thor movie, seeing as it's apparently not that great according to some people. I don't know, I haven't watched it yet. Anyway, next week I should be getting back to the New 52 with Red Lanterns and the New 52 Green Lantern crossovers that I haven't covered yet. And if there's anything you'd like to talk about or see me cover, then make sure to leave it in the comments below. Other than that, make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons so you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then. right here in the Comic Cave.